when we're modeling something, we just want to try to understand the decision-making, the barriers, the constraints, the kind of social forces that might cause people to make different education decisions. And then we want to ask ourselves, given this model, given this kind of narrative of decision-making, is there a social policy that can maybe reduce education inequality in a way that's socially beneficial? So very basically, let's just think about the costs of education. And I mean, there are so many costs to education. Time costs. It might be difficult to move away from your family if you have some kind of needs that need to be met, like taking care of younger siblings. But we're just going to look at tuition. And so we'll have on the y-axis the costs. That'll just be tuition. And then years of schooling. And we'll call that S. Okay? And here we're just going to assume, and this is obviously an assumption that could be revisited in a more elaborate model. I'm just trying to give you a basic idea. You're just going to assume that for every year you have to pay some amount. And I'm not even going to tell you what the amount is. But if you don't do any schooling, you don't have to pay anything. And as you have more schooling, the costs just rise. Okay? So if you have, say, this much schooling, then you have to pay that much tuition. And if you have this much schooling, more years of schooling, then you're going to have more costs. You might call it tuition 1, schooling 2, tuition 2. Basic point. We're just showing graphically that more schooling means you have to pay more tuition. That's a cost. And then let's look at the benefits. There's lots of benefits associated with schooling. And the only one I'm going to look at is, say, your wage after you go to school. And let's just say that that's the end of the model. You go to school, you pay some money, and then later on you get a higher wage. And how we figure that out, we're probably going to go to data. We're going to have on the x-axis, again, years of schooling, and here we're going to have, say, wages. And maybe you look at a big data set from the US. Maybe you look at a smaller data set from a specific state. And you basically are going to usually see, something like this. Lots and lots of data. And you're going to try to say, okay, well, what is this is there a line that can kind of go through these data points and give us some sense of the average relationship between having more years of schooling and the wage you'd get. And we're not going to start at 0 because even if you don't do any schooling, you can still earn some money. But as you get more schooling, your wage can go up. And as you keep going, it might not be the case that your wage is going to keep going up at the same rate. I mean, at some point, at your 27th year of schooling, it might not be so beneficial to get more schooling. And so you might end up with a curve like that, where you would call that diminishing marginal returns. That just means that the benefits of doing an extra year of schooling start to go down. And there's a whole issue here. I mean, behind getting a line like this, there's a whole issue of causality. I mean, it might just be that smarter people go to school more because school's easier for them, and that they're going to get higher wages anyways. So there's tons and tons of literature that tries to actually get at the causal effect. And you can't just do that, by taking a bunch of kids and put half of them in some school and half of them not, and then 20 years later see what happened, because that's kind of unethical and would also take like 30 years. So you try to find different ways to tease out causal effects. Maybe there was a policy change in some state that required additional schooling. Maybe there was a change to tuition benefits. Maybe there was a change to something else that caused people to go to school more. And it wasn't about maybe how smart they are or something else. And so you're actually able to then claim, oh no, this is the actual causal effect of an additional year of schooling. So that's a whole bit of data work that needs to be done. But let's take that to now a model. So we're going to say, all right, what's the optimal amount of schooling? These are the returns, and these are the costs. And we like to say, well, let's look at the benefits minus the costs. So let's call that the net returns. Because when you're thinking about any year of schooling, you got to think, well, this is the wage benefit I get, but then I have to do this much tuition. Whereas here, the wage benefit's much lower, but so is the tuition. So what's like the optimal amount? So we're going to basically subtract this line from this curve. And you can kind of see it. All I have to do is tilt this line downward. Okay, because here I'm just subtracting this much, and here I'm subtracting a lot more. So it's going to pull this curve down, and you're going to get something like this. It's the net returns to additional years of schooling. So what do you want to do? If this is the only thing you care about in the model is schooling, and you want to get the optimal amount of schooling, well, would you go here? Probably not, because If you got a little more, it's still, you're going to still get a higher net return. It's worth it to pay some tuition because you're still on that steep part of the wage curve. So you're going to want to get more. Whereas here, it looks like you're getting a little bit too much schooling because you're paying a ton of tuition and the benefits aren't that high anymore. So what we have learned using kind of the calculus is that if you look at where the curve is flat, you're at the top. So we look here and we're like, oh, the curve's flat here. I can't really gain anything by going for more or for less. And so this is like the optimal amount of schooling. So now we have a very, very, in pictures model, we usually do it with equations, but in pictures model of how somebody is making a decision about schooling. And this is their optimal amount. Okay, so let's ask maybe a social policy question about education inequality. So let's suppose that this is for advantaged groups of students. Students that come from middle class or upper middle class families. They're not first gen, so they know how college works. They've been planning to go to college. Maybe they have high test scores. Maybe they have access to tutors and so on. And now let's assume that there's another population of students and they're less advantaged. Maybe they come from more unstable home lives. Maybe they're first gen. Maybe their parents couldn't afford to pay for tutors. Maybe their high schools had fewer resources. They didn't test as well. And so they're sort of less prepared for college. And for whatever reason, let's say that tuition's the same. That's a terrible assumption, but let's just go with that. Let's say that they have some different data points. So schooling's still good. And by the way, the research does show that, for example, a college education, just a four-year degrees are really, really good. They're worth the investment, even for disadvantaged kids. The benefit might be smaller. And so we might find in data on a subpopulation of more disadvantaged students, data that looks a little bit like that. So their curve is going to maybe be something like this. You still see the same kind of a shape. You still see these big benefits at the start and then smaller benefits as time goes on. But it's just kind of below the original curve for the more advantaged students. And we can even just write that here. Let's say advantaged students. And here we'll call this disadvantaged students. All right, we're going to do the same exercise. Where is their optimal, for the disadvantaged students, where is the optimal amount of schooling going to be? Okay, we're going to again take this curve and subtract this one out, and what you're going to get is that it's going to be lower. It's going to be kind of smaller. It's going to be inside the other curve. So what's the optimal choice if you're part of this disadvantaged group? Well, let's look at where the curve is flat again, and we find, okay, for the disadvantaged group, the optimal amount of schooling, given the costs and the benefits, is going to be lower. And here we're saying it's really driven by the benefits. It might not be that. There might be other additional costs. But you can imagine the benefit story, I think, because one thing that we're learning, especially now as college is becoming more accessible for disadvantaged students through grants and different kinds of programs that are available, through need-blind admissions and so on, we know that we're bringing in students to places like Hopkins, but all across the country, who are less prepared. They might not know how to navigate just the first year of classes. They might have budget constraints, like they can't afford books and so they get behind. They might not understand or avail themselves of the different forms of advisement that are available. So there's a lot of reasons why disadvantaged students just don't see the same benefits to the same college degree. And so optimally, they're going to do less because it just isn't worth paying the tuition as much. So as an economist, what I then want to do is not just say, oh, well, they made their choice and, you know, the advantaged kids made their choice and they both behaved optimally given their circumstances. So, you know, let's be free marketeer about it and we're done. Wrong. That's not what we're doing. The key point there that I want to push on is under these circumstances. So just because somebody made an optimal decision given their circumstances and constraints doesn't mean policy has no role. What you want to figure out is, are there ways to change their circumstances so that we can move this S double star, the optimal level of schooling for disadvantaged students, to this closer to the S star? And look, it might not be the case. Some of this might be they don't want to go to college. Some of this might be they'd rather start their own business. That's fine. We're not going to move that around. But some of this might be we need to make sure that there are programs available for students in their senior year of high school so they can prepare for what they're going to do when they get to college. For example, major choice is a big issue. Students who come into a place like Hopkins, but in many other universities, maybe they want to do engineering, maybe they want to do economics, which are very lucrative majors to do. They maybe want to do it, but they haven't had as much calculus or math in high school. And so they say like, okay, well, I'm going to opt for something a little bit less STEM-like, and the payoff's maybe going to be a little bit less. So maybe we need to think about programs that make sure disadvantaged, talented students who are going to go off to college have the math background so they're not just eaten alive when they come to their first economics course at school. So then you have to ask, well, does that work? That sounds like a great idea. Well, then you want to go to data and you want to say, okay, we're going to invent a program that gives students extra math in their final year of high school. And then we're going to see what that did to the kind of the wage benefits. We might find that that lovely, expensive idea does this. Oh, that's maybe not the best social policy, because all that's going to do is move this line just a little bit up, and it's going to move optimal schooling just a little bit up. So then we have to go back and we have to think about other social policies. Maybe what's happening is students need to work, and so they have to spend 20 hours a week doing not their schoolwork. So then we try, let's have a new social program where we say, all right, we're going to give college students extra money so that they can spend more time studying. And let's say that we do that, and maybe we experiment a bit, maybe we try it out in a couple of places, and we find, oh wow, that really like moved the dial. Okay, according to this model of decision making, the benefits went up, so that's going to mean that the optimal choice of schooling is going to get closer to something like educational equality up to here. And that's how we would kind of basically use a model to think about how people are making decisions by weighing the different costs and benefits and then trying to back out from there, okay, what are the kinds of policies that can change the decision-making framework, so the context, the constraints, and the circumstances that students and decision makers are facing so that they make maybe a better decision that they would like to have made but weren't able to under the original circumstances. So that's modeling for economics.